Hello there. Welcome to Just the Dis. We talk about Blu-rays here. My name is Brian, and today we're talking about Kino Lorber and their July releases. I'm just going to do a little spotlight on some interesting releases coming from Kino Lorber in the month of July, and I got a lot to talk about, so I'm going to get right into it. We've got 4 Vincent Price movies, all coming in these nice slip cases, and the first one I'm going to talk about is The Last Man on Earth. This one is an AIP production, but interestingly, I don't know why I had associated this with, it's AIP, so that's part of why I associated it with Roger Corman, but for some reason I remembered him even maybe directing it, but obviously that's not the case. A gentleman named Sidney Salko directed this, and it is, of course, an adaptation of the first, I believe, adaptation of Richard Matheson's incredible novel, one of my favorite books, I Am Legend, and Vincent Price stars in the main role of the film as this guy who is dealing with vampires, basically. There's nobody left in the world, or so he thinks, and he's dealing with, vampire people that come after him every day, and you've seen adaptations of it. You've probably seen I Am Legend with Will Smith, maybe, or maybe you've seen The Omega Man, which is one of my favorites. I love The Omega Man, but definitely does some different stuff with the source material than this film does. And I learned a good deal about the production history from a wonderful commentary track that's included here by Richard Harlan Smith, who I'm a huge fan of. He's done some really wonderful tracks. Scalpel of the Arrow Blu-ray comes immediately to mind, but he's done a ton more. And he was a perfect fit for this one. As good as a Tim Lucas would be for some movie like this. And so he goes into the production history. He talks about the film originally being set up with Hammer, and how after their Frankenstein and Dracula movies, the censors apparently got wind that they were going to try and make this, and they were like, nope, we will not approve it, don't even bother. And so Hammer had to let it go, and it ended up getting produced ostensibly by AIP. It was shot, I thought this was an LA movie. I think the movie in my head always takes place in LA. I believe I'm not sure if the book actually says where it takes place. Now I'm forgetting, but Omega Man is definitely an LA movie. And so this one actually looks a little bit like LA for a second, but it's shot in Rome, and it's a pretty great location in terms of the desolate city that they set up, the cityscape. And yeah, it's just a really great adaptation. The screenplay was done by, at least in part, by Richard Matheson. He took a pseudonym. I think they made some changes that he didn't necessarily appreciate, but I still think it's a pretty good adaptation. I think it's a really tough book to fully adapt because so much of it is internal and in Robert Neville's head. And yeah, it's a devastating read. But again, one of my favorite pieces of fiction ever written. Matheson, one of my favorite writers of both screenplays and television, Twilight Zone episodes. I mean, he's incredible. So this one also has a little interview with Richard Matheson. It's about 7 minutes or so, and he talks about also that production history stuff and sort of his experience a little bit with like Hollywood in general, but kind of more dealing with this movie and around this period and stuff like that. But anyway, of a great Last Man on Earth movie, one of the first that I think of when I think of that kind of thing. Also, you get a Trailers from Hell with Joe Dante, which is always welcome, and no alternate artwork on this one. Some of these do have alternate artwork. It doesn't mention anything about a new scan, but the scan looks pretty good. I think this might have dropped into the public domain. I'm not actually sure about that, but I feel like I've seen it on some public domain lists at some point. But this transfer looks better than I've seen the movie look in any of those before. So definitely worth checking out. a great Vincent Price film. Next up, so that's from 1964. And then we're going to go, let's see here. We'll go back to 1963 with The Raven. This is part of the Poe cycle that Roger Corman did. This is produced and directed by Roger Corman and has a really great cast. As you can see, Vincent Price, Peter Lorre, Boris Karloff, and it is an interesting adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. But they do take some liberties. They change some things, and in this case, it's about a twist. It's a twisted tale of sorcery. Roger Corman and screenwriter Richard Matheson again adapting, deliver a tongue-in-cheek take on Edgar Allan Poe's most famous poem. It says Dr. Craven, Vincent Price, son of a great sorcerer, now dead, was once himself quite skilled at that profession, but has since abandoned it. And one evening, a cowardly fool of a magician named Bedloe, that's played by Peter Lorre in his declining years, appears at his window as a raven, and they basically can transform him back. But it says he was changed into a raven by this evil sorcerer named Scrabus, who's Boris Karloff, and he needs to change him back, and he also tells a reluctant wizard that Craven's long lost wife Lenore, whom he loved greatly and thought dead, is living with the despised Scrabus. So these two guys now have a reason to go after this other dude played by Boris Karloff, but it is very funny, and the dialogue is very sharp and amusing, and Peter Lorre is given free rein to come up with his own dialogue in some bits, and he comes up with some great little zingers, and I just love seeing these three together. It's, again, I've used the term all-star game kind of movie, and this is 1963, so this is past the point where they were doing some of their biggest horror work, but I still feel like this is continuing their legacy. And so this one I don't think has, no alternate artwork on this either. This has a nice commentary track from David Del Valle, which I was listening to and enjoying, giving a great overview of the careers of all three guys, as well as an overview of the movie, and talking about Poe and Corman, and it's just an incredibly educational track. I find Del Valle can be that way with his tracks often, and that is the case with this one. And then there's Corman's Comedy of Poe, an interview with producer-director Roger Corman on here as well as another Matheson interview. I'm not sure if that's the same one. I think it's a different set of questions. So he's interviewed on this as well. So that's a nice package that you get for The Raven. So that's the second one of the Vincent Price movies. Third, we have The Comedy of Terrors. This is from 1964, like Last Man on Earth. And this is produced by American International, and also features a script by Matheson. And it's a very, very funny script, even funnier, I think, than The Raven. And I find that really neat because you think of Matheson as a genre writer, and this is certainly genre as well, but not necessarily a comedic genre writer, and he has written some incredibly funny exchanges here. The idea is that, at least in part, Vincent Price runs a funeral home that he sort of inherited from his wife's dad. His wife's dad is more or less an invalid, played again by Boris Karloff, who Karloff is really out of it. So, Vincent Price's character is just a diabolical jerk of a gentleman who's mean to his wife and who is constantly trying to poison Boris Karloff's character. And he's the kind of guy, like in the opening of the movie, they show a burial and they show the people standing around as they're about to put the coffin in the ground, and they finish with the ceremony, and everybody leaves. And just when they would bury the coffin, both Vincent Price and his assistant, sort of coffin maker, played by Peter Lorre again, dump the body out of the coffin into the ground and bury it with no coffin, wipe the coffin off, and take it home so that they can, I guess, resell it. So that shows you the kind of guy that he is. And he's just a real unpleasant guy through the whole movie, but humorously so, because it's pretty over the top, and Peter Lorre is really into Vincent Price's wife, and so you can kind of see where this thing might go. But again, some really great dialogue between Vincent Price and his wife, who he's just insufferable to, and Lorre and Vincent Price. It's way funnier than I remembered, and yeah, it's just a really enjoyable, dark comedy, and it's directed by Jacques Tourneur, who of course worked with Val Lewton on a bunch of films like Cat People, Curse of the Cat People. He would go on to do Curse of the Demon and Out of the Past. I mean, just one of my favorite directors of this period. And he didn't do a lot of comedies either, so this is neat to see him dipping his toe in the comedic waters. This has a fantastic commentary by Tim Lucas. I'm glad that he's aboard one of these Vincent Price releases. He always does a stellar job, and this is no exception. Going into production history, actor history, doing what Tim Lucas does, and doing it great. So really nice package overall for Comedy of Terrors. And then last but not least, in terms of the Vincent Price, I didn't get a chance to check this out yet, but Master of the World, this is from 1961. This precedes the other films. And this is directed by Tarantino favorite William Whitney, but also features a screenplay by, guess who? Richard Matheson. And it says, from action adventure ace William Whitney, the director of Daredevils of the Red Circle, Adventures of Captain Marvel, Trigger Jr., comes this high-flying sci-fi spectacular starring screen legend Vincent Price, a mad inventor. It's 1961. You never know. A mad inventor known only as Robur, that's Price, kidnaps a team on a government expedition to investigate a mysterious crater in Pennsylvania. The team is taken aboard Robur's fantastically engineered airship, which you can see there, really fancy-looking thing, which Robur plans to fly around the world to various military installations in his desperate desire to eradicate weapons of mass destruction, thereby bringing about world peace. The kidnapped team's leader, John Strack, that's Charles Bronson in this case, responds by planning an uprising. Let's see here. Henry Hull, Mary Webster, and David Frankham co-star in this astonishing airborne adventure, scripted by Richard Matheson from the classic Jules Verne novels, Robur the Conqueror and the Master of the World. So it's Matheson adapting Jules Verne, but I remember seeing this a long time ago and enjoying it. And with that pedigree, I'm definitely curious to revisit it in this new version. I got to pick it up here. I got a lot of stuff to cover. Okay, moving on to something else here. We've got Coogan's Bluff from 1968. This is directed by the great Don Siegel, starring Clint Eastwood, on the heels of his incredible success internationally with Sergio Leone and the Dollars trilogy, the Man with No Name westerns. He would go on to make his return to American cinema in 1968 by making two films at least. A film called Hang 'em High, directed by Ted Post, which is a straight western, a revenge western, actually a really good revenge western. There's a great Shout Factory Select Blu-ray of that I recommend you check out. But I mean, it has elements of, the sort of spaghetti western kind of vibe to it, and I really like that one a lot. But he also made Coogan's Bluff, and this, I believe, is the first collaboration between Don Siegel and Clint Eastwood, which would go on to be a very fruitful and successful collaboration. And Siegel, of course, would go on to make Dirty Harry, I want to say about 3 years later with Clint, and then they're sort of off to the races after that. I mean, obviously this film had its success as well, and did well enough to warrant continued collaborations, but they obviously got along well, and, the beginning of a beautiful friendship, if you will. But so this is about a fish out of water sort of, cop movie. You have a rural Arizona deputy sheriff who is good at his job but doesn't like to play by the rules, which sounds similar to Harry Callahan. And he, in the beginning of the movie, gets himself in trouble with his superiors, and they put him on a less than desirable detail. They say, you can have all the solo details you want then if you can't be a team player. So they send him to New York City to go after somebody and bring them back. And that doesn't quite go as planned. He meets with a detective lieutenant played by Lee J. Cobb, and he's basically like giving him the strong arm about, you can't go see this guy who's in jail, and Eastwood's supposed to pick him up, but he doesn't have the right paperwork or something. But he sort of sweet talks his way past. He sort of finds a way to get the guy out in his custody, and then ends up losing him. So the convict is now loose, and it's Coogan's fault. And so he has to sort of collaborate with the New York police to try and get him back. And so but he's got his own sort of, I don't want to say country ways, but like not big city ways in terms of dealing with things. And so that's the whole fish out of water element to this movie. But anyway, it's a good Eastwood film, and one that I don't feel like people are talking about too much at the moment. This does have alternate artwork. You can see that is what you get there. It's a nice package in that you get 2 commentary tracks. You get a commentary from cult filmmaker Alex Cox, who of course did Repo Man, Straight to Hell, and a bunch more. I'm a big fan of him, and he's a big fan of Westerns, and he's done a ton of commentaries for Kino Lorber on actually a lot of spaghetti Westerns. He loves that, and if you see Straight to Hell at some point, you can see how he's trying to give his own modern-day tribute to spaghetti Westerns through that film. But anyway, so Alex Cox is on here with 1 commentary track, and that's great. But we also get another commentary track from Alan Spencer, who is the creator of the television show Sledgehammer with David Rash back in the day, which is a really fun cop show. And Alan Spencer is an incredibly knowledgeable cinephile on top of being a very funny guy. And so he gives a good commentary track here as well. And then we also get an interview with actor Don Stroud, who stars in the film. In the cast there, and along with Susan Clark and Lee J. Cobb. But a nice little Siegel film in the beginning, as I said, of the collaboration between Eastwood and Siegel. Then we have the Valdez Horses. And this one also goes by the name Chino. So you can see there in the alternate artwork. This has come out previously from Indicator. I can't remember if that was an all-region disc or not, but I think this is porting over at least one of the features from that Blu-ray. But this one is from director John Sturges. It was a movie of his that I wasn't aware of, and it's hard-hitting Western starring action icon Charles Bronson as Chino Valdez, a leather-tough horse breeder who lives by his own rules. Avoided by everyone for having Native American blood, Chino lives in seclusion until he takes a young runaway, Vincent Van Patten, from Rock and Roll High School. He's only about 14, turning 15 in this movie. This is from 1973. He would go on in 6 years' time to star in Rock and Roll High School, which is where I always remember him from. And so he takes him under his wing and shows him the ropes of ranching, and there's definitely some drama that follows that I'm not going to get into, but a Bronson movie that's underseen and underappreciated, and it has a really enjoyable commentary track from a guy that I also really love, and that's Paul Talbot, who is the Bronson expert in my mind. He has done commentaries on a bunch of Bronson movies, and he wrote 2 books on Bronson. Bronson is Loose, and I think Bronson is Loose Again, talking about different aspects of Bronson's career, but very thorough and enjoyable commentator that I dig. So that is the Valdez Horses. Next up, we have The Devil's Eight. This is another AIP production, and I saw this was coming out. I hadn't seen it. I made the erroneous assumption that this was a war film, but I wasn't really paying attention to some of the background stuff happening here. There's a car flying through the air. It just looks like a war film, right? They look like, and the Devil's Eight, sounds like the Dirty Dozen, like AIP trying to do their thing. So this one is really intriguing because that's not what it is. It is, it's a movie about a guy who pulls a bunch of convicts out of jail to do a job. But it's not a war film. I guess it's ostensibly set in the present time of the film, which again, this is from 1969. This is very much like a Once Upon a Time in Hollywood type movie because it stars Fabian, who we know was sort of one of the actors that Tarantino had looked at as sort of a line to Rick Dalton's career. Like, this is the kind of movies he was doing, was the kind of parts that Fabian would get. And I think even in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he mentions getting a part because Fabian hurt himself or something like that. So anyway, this is also directed by Burt Topper, who I know Quentin is a big fan of. And the script is by James Gordon White and then Willard Huck and John Milius. So that's some nice pedigree there. So it also stars, I said Fabian, Robert DeKey, Larry Bishop, Ross Hagen, and Ralph Meeker. And of course, Christopher George, who is front and center on that cover. And Christopher George plays some kind of federal agent who is basically trying to take down a moonshine ring that is run by Ralph Meeker. So he gets a bunch of these convicts out. You can see the Badge, the Kid, the Shiv, Fingers, the Bomber, Big Arm, the Strangler, Speed Man. He gets them out and he wants them to train as drivers, and he has one of them that's a mechanic, and he sort of teaches them how to get involved with the moonshine world so that they can catch Ralph Meeker. But it does play in some ways like, one of those war movies in terms of they put the gang together, they take them to this remote area, they start training them. But this is one that I'd only heard of but never seen. Very enjoyable, and this is a brand new 2021 2K scan. Looks pretty good, but it's shot on a lower budget, so it's not going to look glisteningly good, but it looks solid. And it also includes an interview with Larry Bishop. And I dug this. I definitely dug this. This is from Scorpion, one of the Kino Scorpion collaboration releases. Next up, we have one that was a nice discovery for me. This is another one that I know Tarantino is a fan of. He's programmed it at the New Beverly at least twice, and it's called What's So Bad About Feeling Good. It's from 1968. Stars George Papard and Mary Tyler Moore, among others. And it is an intriguing film for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, I think it's really neat when a movie that's really never been on home video before suddenly appears on Blu-ray, and that's the case with this. I don't think this even had a VHS release, and now it's on Blu-ray, and it looks pretty good. But what's really interesting about this movie, and there's no way they could have known how relevant it would play in 2021, but it is about a virus. It is a satirical comedy, and said virus gets loose in New York City. Basically, they set it up in that sort of satirical way where New York, everybody's sad and depressed and can't stand living in New York and is angry all the time, and that's just the way it is, and isn't that funny? Ha ha ha. But suddenly this it's a cargo ship appears in New York Harbor, and they notice that the crew has gone very strange in terms of their behavior. Suddenly they're dancing on the deck, and the crew members are like, this is not what the captain was like a week ago. He was the kind that would throw you off the boat. So something's going on. And they realize that there's a bird, I think it's like a toucan, that has some kind of virus. And when you get too close to it, it infects you with the virus. And it does something with the endorphins in your brain and makes you euphoric. And so the bird gets loose and starts flying around New York City. It finds the apartment that a heavily bearded George Papard is living in with girlfriend Mary Tyler Moore. They both sort of dropped out and are now living a beatnik lifestyle. He used to be in marketing or something, and I forget what she used to do. I think she was a singer maybe. And so the bird flies into their apartment, and it infects George Papard, and suddenly the next day he is as happy as he's ever been, and he realizes what's happening, and he wants to infect Mary Tyler Moore, and eventually he does, and then it becomes a thing where once the virus gets loose in the city, it becomes an epidemic of sorts, and this is where it gets weird in terms of the parallels. You can see right there, suddenly they're asking New Yorkers to wear masks. They're saying the virus could mean shutting down the city and closing it off from visitors. They bring in a government guy played by Dom DeLuise in a much more serious but still funny bureaucratic role where he's talking about other viruses and how this one started and is it man-made or whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of weird stuff, again, that really is strange to see from a film from 1968. But the film is ultimately an upbeat one and a funny one and a charming one. And I was fully charmed by it. And I just found it also intriguing that it had these modern-day parallels that couldn't have been anticipated. This has a commentary by film historians Howard S. Berger and Nathaniel Thompson, and 2 trailers, which you can't really find a trailer for this movie online, so that's where you'll find those here. But a nice little discovery for me, and one that I'm glad I finally got to see after finding out about it. So that's what's so bad about Feeling Good. Speaking of movies that have had a poor representation on home video, here's another one. This is a notorious bomb, and I'll get into that in a second, but it obviously stars Lily Tomlin and John Travolta. It came out in 1978, which of course is the year of Grease. We are talking about the near apex of John Travolta's superstardom. So you have Saturday Night Fever in 77, Grease in 78 in the summer, and then this movie comes out in Christmas of 78. And I know it must have upset a lot of people because if they thought they were going to get anything remotely close to Grease, I mean, I guess maybe you could make some parallels to Saturday Night Fever, but not really. That is not what this movie is. And so it bombed in a big way. And I think, maybe the folks involved were not happy with it. And that's part of the reason we don't have a home video release. I think it may have gotten a VHS release, but I don't even think it got a VHS release. So this is another one that really has been out of circulation for a long time. It was playing on MGM HD. It would run on television, stuff like that, but it was notorious for its bomb status and for the fact that it's kind of an odd film, which it is. It's a low-key romance between what's basically a street hustler played by John Travolta. He's sort of living day to day, sort of hustling, not into drugs, but sort of a naive kid that ran away at a young age and is sort of making his way in Los Angeles and getting by. And he runs into this sort of very dour, very unhappy rich woman played by Lily Tomlin, who's just going through a divorce. And he strikes up a conversation with her. Do you remember me? I worked a party that you had at your house. I parked cars and, you were really nice because there was a dent in your car and you didn't blame me for it. And she was like, oh, that was my fault. And suddenly he becomes weirdly obsessed with her. And he starts sort of following her around, and she's just basically like, please leave me alone. Don't bother me. Because she's not happy and because she doesn't really get him. But he has a very lively spirit, and he sort of is one of those people with like no filter that can just make comments that her friends would never make. And so they start to sort of hit it off. But things are complicated by the fact that he is who he is, and she is, kind of a upper class type in LA, and that causes class conflict, and he's got his own demons. And so it's an interesting, if slightly downbeat and somewhat frustrating romantic film. But again, it's nice to see it. I showed this to my wife, who is a big Travolta fan, and we both think it's an interesting film. It's one that will stick with you, I think. Some may find it laughable. I think it's really interesting, too, that it's directed and written by Jane Wagner, who was Lily Tomlin's longtime partner. I think still is. I'm not actually sure, but so it's written and directed by a gay woman, starring a gay woman, and one of the great sex icons of the 1970s. And so there's just something interesting about that. And the story and this character, he's just so naive and so kind of like lost puppy in this way that you really kind of feel for him. So anyway, nice to have this on Blu-ray. Finally, it has an audio commentary by film historians Lee Gambin, Sergio Mims, and Maya Montanez Smuckler, who is the author of Liberating Hollywood Women Directors and Feminist Reform of the 1970s American Cinema. And that's a great sort of three-way conversation about this film, and there's a lot of interesting details about the production and the time it came out, and just great observations about the movie. So a nice commentary track to go with this as well. So good to get that on Blu-ray. Another big one on Blu-ray is George Roy Hill's Thoroughly Modern Millie from 1967. This is an epic musical and a fun one. You know, it's 152 minutes long. It has a roadshow version. So the roadshow edition is actually fully restored. So you get the overture at the beginning, and it's fully restored in 4K by Universal, and it looks gorgeous. That's one thing I will say about this for sure, is the transfer is stunning, and it just looks fantastic. And it's Julie Andrews, Mary Tyler Moore again, and Carol Channing, set in 1922, and it was apparently a hit. And this is, Mary Tyler Moore, Julie Andrews post Sound of Music. She's in a very hot place, and it says the hit musical Thoroughly Modern Millie stars the iconic Julie Andrews in the title role of an innocent small-town girl who comes to the big city in search of a husband. Along the way, she becomes the secretary of the rich and famous Trevor Graydon, played by John Gavin, who will come up in a minute here again in another movie. Befriends the sweet Miss Dorothy, Mary Tyler Moore, fights off the wretched Mrs. Mears, that's the woman who owns the hotel that she's in, and hooks up with a lively paper clip salesman played by James Fox. And in the end, it takes a rich and nutty jazz baby like Muzzy, Carol Channing, to unravel all these complications and give a great party and match up lovers. George Roy Hill, who of course directed Butch and Sundance, The Sting, so he's very comfortable in the pre-1950s America. And so you get Depression era sort of America in The Sting, and this is even prior to that. But I like his sort of take on it. And it's a fun musical because it is not always singing. It's just some, Mary Tyler Moore and Julie Andrews dancing in an elevator, partially because the elevator doesn't work and they have to jump on it to get it to go around, but they turn that into a musical number. And so it's slightly unconventional in that sense, but again, an epic tale. It's produced by Ross Hunter, who I think was a producer on some of the Douglas Sirk films, so it has that beautiful look that he sort of went for with his productions, and just a big one for Julie Andrews fans and musical fans to get finally on Blu-ray. So that's nice as well. Then we have Four Frightened People. This is from 1934, directed by Cecil B. DeMille. Another virus movie, interestingly enough. This one about a group of people who flee. There's some notice that there could be plague on this cruise ship, and a few of the passengers happen to spot somebody getting dumped off the ship, and they decide to take I guess it's like a rescue boat or something, and get away. And so they do, and then they end up stranded on a desert island. And of course, this is filmed, I think, in Hawaii, mostly on location shooting. There is certainly some studio shooting, but also a lot of location stuff. Let's see here. When bubonic plague breaks out on a coastal steamer, 4 passengers steal a lifeboat and set sail on a mission of survival. They land on a remote Malayan island and soon shed all trappings of their former selves. After their native guide is suddenly murdered, they find themselves at the mercy of hostile islanders and must use their newfound survival skills if they're going to escape a terrible fate. Co-starring Herbert Marshall, Mary Boland, William Gargan, and Leo Carrillo, and of course the lovely Claudette Colbert. This largely overlooked treasure highlights the versatility of one of Hollywood's most renowned filmmakers. So, and very interesting, there was a series of films like Go Native by, I'm going to forget the director, right? Leo McCarey directed that. Birds of Paradise with Dorothy Lamour and Joel McCrea. There's just a series of this kind of tropical island kind of movies in this time. and this is one of those. And there's a great sort of transformation of Claudette Colbert, who starts as a very buttoned down, glasses, hair completely tucked in, and then she turns into this like long hair down, glasses off, island woman, and it's an interesting sort of progression. Has a very nice commentary track from Nick Pinkerton, who I've mentioned before on the channel. I'm a big fan of Nick Pinkerton. He does a wonderful job. And that's just a really interesting DeMille film I'd never really known too much about. Here's one from Kino Classics. This is a collaboration with Something Weird. They've done a bunch of these. And it is a double feature of Girl Gang plus Pin Down Girl. And these are both produced by a guy named George Weiss, who I believe worked with Ed Wood, if that gives you a sense of the kind of filmmaking we're talking about here. But they're definitely sort of exploitation movies, slightly trying to couch themselves as message movies. Girl Gang deals with, some girls who are working for drugs. Basically, we see them steal a car from a guy on the side. Like, basically, two of them get a ride from the guy. Then another couple girls in another car pull up in front of them. Once they pulled over, they knock the guy out. They steal his car. They bring it to this dude they know who deals them drugs, not just the weeds. They call it weeds, plural in this. So marijuana is a part of it, but also heroin. They call it they have some really interesting drug terminology. Mainliners, I think, for when they're, syringing themselves, and joy poppers. And so it's definitely got a sort of a reefer madness kind of vibe in terms of the way that the drugs are used and referred to and how they affect people. And so it's intriguing, definitely. And then Pin Down Girl, let's see, I forget what that one's about now. But they're both in that sort of exploitation. One's from 1954, that's Girl Gang, and Pin Down Girl's from 1951. They're very short, 63 minutes and 55 minutes. They're just, again, very exploitative, but I love the idea that they're trying to sort of play it as, educational / message kind of stuff. But it's pretty shocking to see, people doing drugs and smoking weed in a movie in 1954. So this is an intriguing one for sure, if you're into that kind of energy. It has commentaries. There's an audio commentary on Girl Gang from film historian Alexandra Heller-Nicholas, who is also wonderful. A lot of great commentaries on these discs here. And then on Pin Down Girl, a commentary by Eric Schaefer, who wrote a book called Bold, Daring, Shocking, True, A History of Exploitation Films. And he goes into the George Weiss stuff, as does Alexandra Heller-Nicholas in her commentary track. So great to have these films, but also great to have the context provided by those commentaries. Moving right along. This is from 1961. Also produced by Ross Hunter. And definitely a tearjerker in line with, again, sort of a Douglas Sirk kind of movie. Melodrama. So this one's called Backstreet. It stars Susan Hayward, John Gavin, and Vera Miles. And it's a star-crossed lovers kind of movie. It's basically, it opens at an airport where John Gavin's character, who's a Marine, is coming back from his service, runs into Susan Hayward and ends up, because his flight is delayed, going to the same hotel that she's going to meet this guy who supposedly wants to see her drawings. She wants to be a designer, but we soon find out quickly that he says initially, meet me in the lobby, and then, the guy at the front desk, he's waiting for an important long-distance call. He needs you to come up to his room. Yeah, right. So, of course, he comes on to her right away, but because the rooms are non-air conditioned and they have windows both by the door and out the back, John Gavin's room is right next to Susan Hayward's room. He hears her talking to him and trying to get out of there, and she makes up a story about how her fiancé is waiting for her, and he hears that the guy's not going to let her go, and he knocks on the door and plays the fiancé, and they have their meet cute, and they really hit it off. They just have this connection. But he is the son of a department store mogul, and he is just coming home to deal with stuff, and so they have this initial day where he spends the day with her, and it's just one of those like falling in love in one day kind of things. And then, she sort of is really just flipped for him. It tells him she loves him, and he has some pause, and then she realizes that it's not as serious as she thought it was, and she bails. And then he tries to get her to come on the plane with him, but she doesn't make it. So it's one of those things where they're missing each other, and the story sort of proceeds from there. Will they ever connect? Who knows? But since I said it's a tearjerker, I mean, it may not end well, but it may be romantic nonetheless. And I enjoyed this. This is a very solid film. Also has a commentary by David Del Val, and Susan Hayward and John Gavin are both great in this. But I didn't really know this one until this Blu-ray. I'd heard of another movie called Backstreet with Irene Dunn, but never this version. So that was cool. One from Billy Wilder here, The Fortune Cookie from 1966. He did this obviously post. I'm trying to think what the first collaboration between Jack Lemmon and Mathau was, and I can't remember, but they would obviously go on to work together under Billy Wilder a few times. Now I'm blanking on all the big ones except Buddy Buddy, which is Billy Wilder's last movie. But anyway, this one's about a TV cameraman who works for CBS, played by Jack Lemmon, who gets injured during a football game. He gets hit by a player, and his, I think, brother-in-law, Mathau, convinces him to pretend he's been really hurt so that he can sue and make a lot of money. And, we'll see where that goes. But it is written by Billy Wilder and I.A.L. Diamond, who is one of his great collaborators. And for me, it's not as good as some of the best collaborations they had, but it's still good and not on Blu-ray, and that's exciting to have it. It's black and white, and 235:1. Looks good. I know it will look good on Blu-ray. Has an audio commentary by Joseph McBride, author of Billy Wilder, Dancing on the Edge, as well as a Trailers from Hell. So that's for Billy Wilder fans. Let's see here. One more. I think I'll do Arise My Love. This is bringing back the Billy Wilder connection here. This is directed by Mitchell Leisen, who did a bunch of, well, not a bunch, but several Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett scripts. Easy Living, Midnight. Those are great Mitchell Leisen films based on scripts by Brackett and Wilder, I believe. And this is another one that I'd never heard of called Arise My Love. And it has Claudette Colbert and Ray Milland, as you can see. And it says, for Mitchell Leisen, the acclaimed director of Midnight, Death Takes a Holiday, and Easy Living, comes this romantic comedy starring Hollywood greats Claudette Colbert and Ray Milland, with a script co-written by legendary team of Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett. Ace reporter Gusto Nash Colbert poses as the wife of an imprisoned American pilot, Tom Martin, played by Milland, to save him from execution by Spanish fascists. The jester lands her on the front page story and the praise of her boss, Mr. Phillips, Walter Abel, of course. Tom tries to romance Gusto, but though she likes him, her career comes first, and Tom himself prefers freedom fighting to settling down. Comedy becomes drama as their mixed feelings lead them on a circuitous path through the deepening chaos and catastrophe of the early days of World War II. So, gorgeously shot by Charles Lang. So that's cool too. So I definitely want to check this one out. The Mitchell Leisen Brackett Wilder combo has been always interesting to me. And so this, I'm sure, will be enjoyable. And I definitely want to check it out. And I think that's it. I think that's all I'm going to spotlight for this month at Kino from them. Definitely check out their website, kinolorber.com, to see what they have coming in the future. They always have interesting stuff in the works from various decades. And this is just sort of giving you an idea of the breadth of things that Kino brings out in a given month. And I'm always excited for every month that they have new titles coming out, because there's always so much variety and so many great commentaries. They really have come into their own in terms of finding a great stable of folks to do commentaries on their discs. And as I mentioned, there's just an all-star team of folks giving you context on these films. So I can't recommend these discs enough. There's a lot of great stuff in here, a lot of variety, and I'm hoping there's some stuff for you to check out if you're into whatever. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you guys very soon. Bye-bye.